Welcome to The Writer's Dream. This is a show where authors can talk about their books, how they write them, how they publish them, and how they market them. We are on YouTube, we are on ltv-eh.org, we are on Facebook. On Facebook, please look for The Writer's Dream. On YouTube, look for my name, Linda Maria Frank. And for LTV-EH, just look for videos. So if you want to contact me and ask me a question or you'd like to be on the show, please use my email, which is my initials, lmf217@hotmail.com. So today's guest is Mark Torres. He is the author of A Stirring in the North Fork. And I am excited to hear about this book because I love the title. I like a different title. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Mark.
Sure. Well, thank you, Linda. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm thrilled. Again, my name is Mark Torres. I'm the author of A Stirring in the North Fork. It was released in December of 2015. Writing was a project I've always written. In fact, I'm a labor and employment attorney. I represent a very large Teamsters union, Local 810, in the New York City area. And I love what I do. I love legal writing. But I wanted to have somewhat of a freedom from the constraints of legal writing, hence the stories of coming up with a fictional novel, which I did here, to be able to elaborate and kind of just be creative in the writing process.
Are you a Long Island native?
Yes, I currently reside in Floral Park. I was born and raised in Queens. My wife was from the Lower East Side, and we kind of merged and moved out towards Nassau.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about your book.
Well, Stirring in the North Fork, it's a murder mystery cold case regarding the brutal and unsolved murder of a woman in 1972. And an out-of-work attorney stumbles upon the case 37 years later and wants to investigate and goes out to the Norfolk area to kind of uncover the shocking truth surrounding the story.
So is this based on a true story?
No, you know, and I always say, I'm always asked this question. Unfortunately, it's a fictional story, but unfortunately in real life there are many unsolved murders, and I'm naturally drawn to that sort of genre. You know, trying to go back and trace the steps of the crimes and try to, you know, see if you could come up with some justice.
So what made you pick the title of Stirring in the North Fork?
Well, that took a lot of deliberation with my wife, who's the creator of the artwork as well. We've, for the last 15 years or so, my family and I vacationed out in the North Fork in the Greenport area. We've come to know it and love it. And, you know, for me, the visual setting was just, most people there, they're drawn to read a book. I was drawn to write one due to the setting. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, setting's very important to me too. All of my books pretty much were inspired by two things. One of them was setting, and the other one was the fact that I taught forensic science. So there'd be some area in forensic science that I was very interested in, so I decided to marry the two.
Sure.
So my first one was also a Long Island venue, Fire Island.
Yes.
So, okay, so tell me about your main character.
Savoy Graves. He's the humble yet very likable character, somewhat autobiographical. He's an attorney, was working in a big law firm during the downturn of the economic crisis, lost his job, was distraught, looking for something to do, and he stumbled on the case. And you know, he was always raised to be this dogged type of a detective. He couldn't let things go so simply. And this is the type of case that was meant to be buried, and you know, he was very formidable and wanted to uncover what happened.
Okay, so was he working at the time?
No, he had, again, he was laid off, so he had somewhat of a hiatus and a severance to fall back on. And also, in many ways, the book kind of reflects on self-discovery. You know, what is his worth? He's no longer at this firm. He knew he had the credentials, yet he's not there. So it became sort of his job, if you will, in his project, and he embodied all of those principles to try to solve the crime.
How did he get interested in this case?
Well, again, he learned in the case. He's familiar with the area as well, so he wanted to venture out to the North Fork. You know, it was a natural draw to him because it was unsolved, yet there were too many possibilities that he couldn't understand why it was unsolved, whether it was foul play, whether it was you know, just negligence, and he stumbled on it and just kept pursuing it. And the more he went, the deeper it got for him both for the case and also for himself.
Okay, so it's a mystery, and I write mysteries too. So I find the most challenging thing about writing a mystery is to make sure that everything you mention somehow or other gets explained,
Yes.
one way or the other. So how did you do that?
Well, my profession really I relied upon. I felt obligated to get things right. I would not want to make something up for the sake of fiction's sake or entertainment's sake. I researched each aspect or important aspect of the story. Certainly the geography was legitimate, the locations were real, everything from certain elements to solving the crime. It was all researched to the point where I knew that I felt comfortable with being as truthful as I could be in that aspect.
Okay, so your heroine, Savoy Graves?
Yes, Savoy
Okay,
Graves.
so your hero, he found out about this cold case, how?
Well,
I'm not clear on
strangely enough, it was in his laundry room in his co-op building. And in the basement, they had this library, a stack of old books. And within that was a stack of old newspapers.
Okay.
And he found within a local tabloid, which was fictionalized for the sake of that, the article on the murder of Maria Cruz. And the more he read, then he started the research from whether it's simple internet research to going out to the local libraries in Riverhead and so forth and trying to uncover more of the crime. And the more he found, well, the more he saw, really, he couldn't find more until he was able to find the reporter who published the articles at the time. And that drew the first connection to that person.
Yeah, okay. That's what I was looking
Yeah.
for. How did he get hooked into this case? And then clues.
Yeah.
What,
Well, the clues in the papers, but also when he first met the reporter, his name is George McBride, and it's a chapter in the book called Scoop. He was the author of those articles, and he was always bugged by the case too. The local law enforcement, there was some involved, some not, and he wasn't sure why these leads weren't followed further. And the more George relates to Savoy started to discover on his own as he's putting the pieces of the crime together.
okay, so from that reporter, he got leads to other people, like did you bring in the detective, the
Yes,
original
well,
detective?
the
on
initial
case?
detective, John Conti, a very likable character, strong-willed, tough cop from Brooklyn initially, and he actually was retired and moved out upstate. So that led Savoy to go upstate New York to discuss it with him. At first, he was reclusive and resistant in explaining it, but then as he understood Savoy's natural, genuine interest in the matter, he started to give him more evidence, and that started to lead more down the road towards.
Did you ever get into the forensics?
To some degree, there was somewhat of a lay person's mentality. It wasn't so specific scientifically, but it was in terms of just tracing from reports, particularly the inside police reports that really were never to be seen.
See, that's the interesting part. Why did it become a cold case?
Well, I've always been drawn to that genre.
I don't want you to give things away, but
Yeah.
why did it become a cold case?
Well, the premise of the book and what drives me as a writer is it makes you scream for justice. Something so bad happened so long ago.
Which is important to know.
Absolutely. And when he was driven by that, the reader is drawn into this brutal murder, yet unsolved murder. And the more you go down with Savoy into the story, you're really feeling for the victim, as well as Savoy Graves, and trying to solve it. And as you say, without giving too much away, it was really that quest for that screaming for justice that really drives me as a writer.
Something wasn't right.
It was so bad it had to be made right. That's the goal. The question is, can it have been, or 37 years ago, is it solvable?
All right, so let me ask you about your writing habits, because all authors have their writing habits, but most of them will come down and say, you have to be disciplined, you have to have a certain amount of time set aside, and I don't know how you do that when you have a real job and a family, but so what are your, what's your approach to writing?
Well, my first thing I would say is when I went to law school, I was working full time. So I always say writing at that point, anything compared to that is easy. But secondly, the writing project for me in this story took maybe 4 months, astonishingly short. Because-
Astonishingly short.
and I know that now as I'm trying to work on the next projects I'm working on. So, it was a collaboration with my wife. We bounced around the ideas. I started to really write and dig into it. And it is a short, concise novel. I didn't believe in extending it for the sake of having a longer novel. I reached out to publishers initially on, and they said, well, if you added a couple of thousand more words or 100 more pages. And I was like, well, I'm not comfortable with that. I like the story. My style is reflective. My attorney writing, my legal writing is reflective that it's concise.
See, that's my problem, because I look at my books and my plots are adult. I go into the the forensic science and the history and whatnot, and I can come up with 212 pages, and if I could come up with 350 pages, I could make this an adult novel. I struggle with that, but then again, I say to myself, I always wanted to write for kids, because to me, kids' literature lives. Nancy Drew, 87 years old or however long she is, and so I wanted to write for that genre. First of all, I spent my life with them, and so what I had to do was put in just enough history and science, so that it didn't bore them. And then at the end of the chapter, they had to jump to the next chapter.
Absolutely.
So when you write like that, which is probably the same situation you had, then you really have to. It's hard to write so many pages.
It is, and I'll commend my wife, Dahlia, who said that you got to show me, don't tell me. And as a lawyer, I'm telling a judge, I'm telling a court. Here, and I was doing that, but I added that splash of descriptive writing, of I call it compassionate writing, making you feel for these characters.
That's right.
Whether it's not just love and admiration, but it's also hatred and fear. So it was all important elements that I wanted to do as an author.
Yeah, nobody's going to like your book unless they like your character.
I agree. Or hate.
Yeah, or hate
And I
them,
think that
yes,
drives
yeah.
it. It drives us. There's a villainous figure.
Yeah, you have to evoke emotion for people
Absolutely.
to really get into your writing.
And I think I've always been drawn to that style, whether I knew I had a style or not. That was what I've always drawn. I remember when I was young, and my son Jake now, who's writing a book. He's 10 years old. He's inspired by that, and I think that's a wonderful way to kind of express yourself. Put it in paper, and don't worry about format. Don't worry about substance. Again, I don't think I'm not drawn to a particular style. I just write what I feel.
Yeah.
And I want to make the reader feel.
And
it.
I also think there's a readership out there that doesn't want a long book. There are some who I love the 1,000-page books, but not always.
Yeah,
every once in a while.
It's an investment of time, and
Yeah.
I know in my life and most people's lives, time is short these days, and I wanted to just be concise and brief, and yet tell a story that'll last.
Yeah, well, I think, to me, the essence of, or the motivation behind my writing is I like to tell stories.
Yes.
And it isn't so much the writing, although you have to be a decent writer. How did you deal with the research? What was doing the research like?
Well, the research, again, geographically was there for me, and because of the characters, so many of the characters are either autobiographical or even influenced by my family and people that I've met and known down the road somewhere or not. That came easy. The research was, I reached out to a few people in the FBI. Federal FBI had some information on particular equipment that was key to the story that I wouldn't just make up without that.
There you go. There's the
discussion.
forensics.
Yeah.
See,
really.
Yeah, I find the research to be. I wrote a blog once about writer's block. Somebody asked me to write a blog about writer's block, and I said, if you have writer's block, research the setting that your book is in, because I don't care where. If you're writing a romance novel that takes place in a little town in Mississippi, and you research that little town in Mississippi, you're going to find stuff, and it's going to allow you to flesh out the story even more, and you'll get around that writer's block.
I agree. I've always been that visual type writer. In fact, I've been blessed with many good reviews of the book, including 2 movie producers who actually.
Oh, really? I'm going to actually read one of your reviews eventually.
And they had said that. They would consider optioning it for a movie, and I know I was never really too drawn in. I was just a wait-and-see aspect, and it still is to some degree. But most of the people who read it, and I know when I read it, it's very visual-oriented. You could see it in cinema because because it's there, the way it's written, it's the style I have.
That's how I write my books. I see it.
Absolutely. I think the opening scene is this horrific murder scene, unfortunately. That field, I know where it is today. I know where it is right now. It's a beautiful, serene field, yet something horrible happened there in the fictional world 37 years ago.
Yeah, so that's, but I think what you're going to find, I don't know about your second book, but the more you write, the more you're going to rely on your research.
Yes, I agree.
To inspire you, you know. I mean, that's how it was with me too. The first book, it just came.
Yeah.
I knew the place. I knew what I wanted to say. The story, but of course the story. There's a lot of information in the story that is my background also.
Absolutely.
It was the forensics that I knew from teaching, and it was things about sailing. There's sailing in the book, and the history of Fire Island. I was a volunteer at the Fire Island Lighthouse, so I kind of talked about all of this stuff.
it was just
And
relaying
so
what
it was
you've
all
done.
there.
Absolutely.
But now when I write a book, I have to research because it isn't always about something that I know about. I'll give you just a quick story, and then I'm going to read your review. My last book has to do with an Avenger airplane that was made by Grumman during World War II. My heroine's great-grandmother was a WASP during World War II, and she was a test pilot for Grumman. The plane crashes in 1943, and they don't find it till 2012. Okay, so it comes to the attention of my heroine because of the fact that her great-grandmother left a note in the plane. The inspiration for this was I went to the Cradle of Aviation Museum with my family, and they were doing whatever, and I came across the plane, and I saw this was all about what they had in the display was how women built them, women tested them, women flew them to the West Coast where they were used. And you could climb into the plane. I climbed into the plane, and I said, I have to write it. You know, it was really inspiration.
You're drawn to it.
But boy, there was a lot of research in that book.
Yes.
And that's the last book. So as I go, and the next book that I have an idea for is even going to be more research.
Sure.
And you're going to find that the research will enable you to expand the book more.
Yes.
So, you know,
It also give you creative inspiration
yeah,
as well.
exactly. As a writer of a first book, you're going to find that there's a lot of things that went into this book that you're going to really expand on.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to read your review because I want to get to your children's
That's it.
book as well. Okay. This book has been a force throughout social media where satisfied readers have posted pictures of the book on 6 of the 7 continents, not Antarctica, right?
Actually, that's changed since.
In the mere 4 months since its release. For more exciting news on upcoming book events, follow Mark on Facebook, Mark Torres Author, Twitter at M Torres Author 1, and by searching #Mark Stirring in the North Fork. So that's a nice review.
Well, thank you.
So tell me about the movie.
Well, actually, I'll get to that. But it touched on that review, and I could happily say that it has now been pictured in Antarctica, so it's in all 7 continents in the world. In fact, on the anniversary, on December 13th, 2016, I received an email with the picture of a reader holding the book on an ice sledge in Antarctica. And
Well, I guess they read a lot there.
yeah, well, the readers were going, and that's really was my marketing. It was obviously social media driven, and it was important to get the readers engaged without saying, hey, buy my book. I would never do that. I would never want that done to me. So we found an interesting way, and I kind of remember those Travelocity commercials with the little gnome, wherever they went. So I said, why don't we gnome the book? Why don't we have people, and people were posting pictures in Paris, in Kenya, in Philippines, all over the world, until finally Antarctica. And it was a wonderful way to kind of engage readers, but also promote the book.
It's a great idea. It's a great marketing idea.
And it was really fun. And when I saw that picture, it really brought a tear. We were really happy with that. It was somewhat of an amazing feat.
Because you have discovered that writing was fun.
Yeah.
Publishing. Did you self-publish?
I did. This
Yeah,
is self-published
that's
through
right.
Creative Space. It never, and even till today, it never felt like work. And that's the most
Right.
satisfying
But
part.
marketing is a challenge.
It is. And even then was enjoyable. It was
Yeah,
a
well,
challenge, but it was
yeah.
a fun aspect. It
Yeah.
never really felt.
I find it fun too, but it's still challenging. It's
Absolutely.
challenging to always find out, well, where can I market this next?
You just want to get your product out. And people enjoy
And
it.
so you have another book
Yes, I do.
that is traditionally published.
That's correct. I can now say I'm a published author. I'm pleased. This is called Good Guy Jake. It's a union-related children's book, and this is more in line of the work I do in helping. And the idea of the premise of the book is to try to teach our youth the positive values of labor unions and working class and all those positive values, and we're really pleased with that.
And Jake is your son.
Jake is my son. All of my family members are mentioned in the book: Olivia, Isabella, my wife Dahlia, all through different characters. And
Who published it?
This is published through Hardball Press. Tim Sheard was very helpful. We collaborated on this, and hopefully going forward, I'd like to work with Tim on other projects, including successors or follow-up to this book as well.
Right. Now, your wife does the artwork?
Not for this book. This was her project here.
Right.
The artwork was done. He's already had an illustrator for his other projects that he does. So it was collaborating in that regard with them.
Yeah, you find if you write children's books and you actually get a publisher to publish them, they don't want your artwork, they want to do their own artwork. Then you find out if they buy your the rights to your book for a movie, they don't want you to do the screenplay, they want to do the screenplay. So,
It's a
and by the
working
time
for-
you see it, you don't even recognize it as your own
true.
work.
It really is. You know, and I guess that comes with somewhat with the territory. For me, you know, being really a now two-time author who does it more, and I don't want to say a hobby because I wouldn't minimize the work. It's incredibly challenging work as an additional part of my career as an author. I guess that comes with the territory.
So how did you get the movie hook?
One of my clients had, I guess, another client of his who had told him about it, and they loved the book, and they've done small movies. One of them with Rosario Dawson. I said, well, she's a noticeable actress, and you know, and like anything else, it takes a lot of capital, a lot of things. You know, one of the things I've been told about the book is that because Savoy, throughout the story, a lot of times is by himself, it makes it harder to shoot and film. And I was like, well, I know a lot of movies that have narrative, and Memento comes to mind, that I have always enjoyed that had that narrative. So even if the actor's alone, you could still shoot a scene. But that's all for the business aspect of it, and I'll just defer to them on those.
Right. Well, what happens, I'm going to make a suggestion to you.
Sure.
Join an authors group.
Yes.
Long Island Authors Group.
I am actually part of it.
Oh, did you
Yes,
join already?
I did.
All right, I should know that.
No,
Because I
it's
run their events for them. I and another person. He does the fairs and I do like the libraries and stuff. And we have a meeting the first Wednesday of every month. And the last meeting we had, the one before it, the first meeting of this season, I did a little talk on how to get your book on the screen.
Wonderful.
And actually, I've never done it, but I
Yeah,
researched it.
absolutely.
And I talked to a number of people, and basically what it is this is good because it's not a big budget item.
Yeah.
Don't start with a big budget item because you have to raise, as you said, you have to raise the money.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the most challenging thing, and also the thing that I found most people said to me was you had to know somebody.
Yeah.
It's all the people I know who've done this. Well, not all of them. They have had a person who they knew who connected them to somebody. I was on Fire Island selling my books this summer, and a woman picked up the books and she said, "This is great. This is the kind of thing that kids need. I know somebody, my cousin or brother-in-law, somebody works in some industry or other. I don't even pay attention to this anymore, and I'm going to give this to him." So I hope that when I get this phone call, that I don't ignore the caller ID, because they had caller ID and I don't know this person, I'm going to talk to them, because they usually want to sell you something. So, but that's an exciting thing that always kind of looms over here. And
Especially if you're, as I say, particularly myself, the way I write so visually that it almost seemed like a natural transformation. But again, you always stay grounded. I mean, for me, ultimately, you know, I went a local library and I was with my children and we're getting books for their school. And I kind of said, let me just check. And I saw my book on the shelf and I checked. They said several are taken out. And then I was able to pull out. I said, you know, to me, that's a great legacy because when I'm long gone, it's in the public libraries.